let's get started with the session. So first of all, the important dates. I hope everybody is familiar with this already. The registration is closing on 24th November, and you can take snap up to 3 times. Right? So this is an important thing this year, because till last year the weight was out of 3 attempts, you can take a maximum of 2 attempts. So people could decide to take only 1 attempt or 2 attempts last year. But since this year, it is going to be, or from this year, it is going to be all 3 attempts. So if you want, you can actually take all the 3 attempts, whether it is the 10 December or the 18 December or the 23rd December. You can take all of them if you want to. Right? Whether you should or not, that's a separate question. What I would typically recommend people to do is to take maybe 2 attempts. Right? So that is a good number, because see, what happens is, because there's no normalization, you never know how your slot will turn out to be. And they have explicitly written this on their website, that there is not going to be any normalization. And when there is no normalization, let's say you appear only for the first test and it turns out to be difficult, your score will be on the lower side. If the second one is easier, everybody in the second slot would end up scoring on the higher side, but they are not going to normalize, which means you will be at a disadvantage. So though they have written that we'll take care of the we'll try to ensure that the difficulty is constant across the slots and all of that. Difficulty is a very subjective assessment. So it's not really something that you can keep constant across unless you be very, very careful while designing the test. So that's not going to happen, which means that ideally, let's say if you're a serious SNAP aspirant, you symbiosis appears in one of the top colleges that you have as your priority, then I think you should be looking at 2 attempts. Otherwise, I think 1 attempt should also be fine. 3 attempts is possibly something that you might not want to do. It shows that if you're desperate, I think you can still take 3 attempts, but I think 2 attempts should be fine for most of the candidates. Okay, so it's an individual call. I will leave that up to you. You have to figure out based on your scores and all of that. And also there's a clash with IFT, right? So a lot of you have mentioned that also in the chat window, that it's the second snap is clashing with IFT, right? So what do we do? See, then if you're taking IFT, obviously, because it is happening on only one day, you have to go for IFT. You cannot then take snap on the same day. So then you can take maybe snap 1 and snap 3, right? Is there an extra fee for extra attempt? Obviously, I mean, that is how it is. So every attempt, I think, is 1,000 rupees or something, 1,500 or something like that. Just check that fees on the website. I forgot the exact fee structure, but for every attempt, you essentially have to pay. Okay, 1950 is what people are saying. So of course, you guys are more aware on those things compared to me. So 1950 per attempt is what it is. So that's what you will have to keep in mind. And then once the tests are done, the result will be out on 10th Jan. So first week Jan itself, you will get to know what you scored and all of that. Again, let me reiterate, there is not going to be any normalization. So it's better to take 2 attempts rather than taking only 1 attempt. But I will leave that up to you. Now let's talk about format. So the test format for the last 2 years has been this, wherein you have 15 questions on English, 25 questions on analytical and logical reasoning, and 20 questions on quant DIDS. So here it appears as sections. So you'll see 3 different sections when you start the test, and you can do whatever you want, by the way. So all the 3 sections are visible. So it's not like CAT wherein you have to go from one section to the next, etc. At the top, you'll be able to see 3 tabs, which will take you to 3 different sections. You can click on that particular section and go to questions of that particular area, the way it happens in IMS mocks as well. So the mocks are designed in the exactly same manner, right? So you're going to have 15 questions of English, 25 of logic, 20 of quant. And when you look at the difficulty of the last 2 years, so I have accounted for the last 2 years difficulty, and I'm going to talk about both of them, because last year it was slightly easier. And when I say easier, again, it's a subjective assessment, but last year was a little difficult compared to the previous. So when we look at snap 21, it was slightly more difficult than snap 2020 because of the quantitative ability section. So the other sections, which is English and logic, were almost similar in difficulty, but the quant section turned out to be slightly more difficult. Plus last year, I think there were 2 questions which were wrong, at least in the slot in which I appeared for the test. In other slots, I'm not aware whether there were any wrong questions, etc. And because they don't normalize, again, it's like a problem. Some particular slot might be slightly easier, some particular slot might be medium and all of that. So those things can always happen. And that is why, though I'm going to give you some estimate in terms of what the cutoffs look like, take it with that understanding that things can always change a little bit, right? So plus or minus 2 is what you should keep in mind when you look at the snap scores. Now, in terms of attempts for English, typically we would say that a 12 to 13 is a good attempt. And why we make that statement is because most of the questions come from either grammar or vocab, right? And even if you sometimes don't know vocab, let's say there are 4 questions on vocab, you might want to take a shot at maybe a couple of them, right? So that is why 12 to 13 attempts is a good number. If you score lower in one area, that doesn't matter because there are no sectional cutoffs. You can always try to maximize in some other area. So always try to see where you can maximize your score. So if you're a good quant candidate, you might want to maximize your score there compared to, say, verbal. Whereas if you're a verbal candidate, you might want to do more questions on the verbal. Suggested time, though we have written 12, 14, I think it generally turns out to be on the lower side. A lot of people are able to attempt in maybe 8 to 10 minutes as well, simply because there were no RCs. So last year there was no RC. The year prior also there was no RC, because in 15 questions, if you ask one RC, you end up taking about 4 or 5 questions. Now, will you not have RC this time? The answer is nobody knows that. There might be an appearance of RC, or they might not ask it. So nobody knows that. Right? Mentally, you should be prepared for it. And considering most of you would have prepared for CAT or NMAT and all of that, RC is not a unfamiliar thing for you. So if RC appears tomorrow on the snap, you should be able to face it. In terms of analytical and logical reasoning, an attempt of around 20 is generally considered to be a good attempt. You can spend somewhere around 25 odd minutes on this, and the remaining time on the quant section. In quant, last year, we would have said an attempt of 15, 16 is good. Last year's difficulty, an attempt of 13, 14, 15 would have been good as well. So depending on the difficulty of that particular slot, the good attempts will always change. But this is like possibly taking sort of an average of the last 2 years as to what has happened, and then giving you some numbers as to what you can aim for. Right? Marking scheme is +1 and -0.25. How much accuracy? Oh, so typically we would say 90% plus accuracy. That's the accuracy that I am keeping in mind, because see, when you're, first of all, you don't have a lot of choice here. It's just 60 minutes, 60 questions, right? And most of the questions will fall into the type where you, especially in, let's say, the quant section, right? That you read a question, if you know what to do, you solve it. If you don't know what to do, don't solve it, because time crunch, right? In English or in analytical and logical as well, the questions aren't going to be very, very lengthy. But of course, you have to maintain that speed and all of that. So we'll say 90% accuracy is what anybody should be aiming for. So if I'm attempting, say, 15 odd questions, right, in the quant section, I should be looking at somewhere around 13 plus correct, either 13 or 14 correct. There's a question from Arg. Will the difficulty level be same as that of mock snap, as this mock is very difficult? So first of all, you don't know what the actual difficulty will be like. And even last year, actually, I'd done a live snap solving. It's there on YouTube. If you search for snap live solving IMS, you will see a video from last year. And the difficulty of IMS mocks is actually pretty close or slightly higher to what you would actually encounter on the snap. So don't think that IMS mocks are very, very difficult. It's actually good that you're facing difficult papers, because when you have a difficult paper and you go for a test, it comes out to be easy, you are in a better position. If you are used to easy papers, you go for the test and then you suddenly see a difficult test, you're basically clueless as to what to do. So that is why IMS mocks are pretty good. I had seen last year what the mocks were like. I haven't taken any mocks this year for Snap, but then we don't really experiment too much with respect to what difficulty we are giving to the students. So that's why don't worry too much about it. Even if you score on the slightly lower side, it's fine. You just need to understand where you can possibly go from there. The official mock by Snap. Oh, the official mock is stupid. So I don't know. I mean, don't even worry about official mock. So last year I had taken the official mock, and I don't even know why they gave that. There are a lot of errors in the official mock. They repeat questions from one year to another. So I don't know from where they've used those questions, but it's not a true indicator of what the official Snap mock is. I mean, it's not like if you take that and that will give you a reality of what can happen on the actual Snap. Don't really see the point of taking it very serious. Okay. Yeah, so as Anupriya has also mentioned, many questions were wrong in the official mock. So that's why I remember taking the official mock last year and I was like, what is happening? There are so many questions that are wrong. So don't worry about it. Okay. Now, in terms of numbers, these are the things that you should be aiming for, right? So on the left-hand side, you will see what score you should be aiming for a particular percentile. And this is from last to last year and last year. Okay. Now, last year, the paper was slightly difficult, and that is why I've given those numbers as well as to what estimates you can possibly consider for a certain percentile. And I've given 98, 97, 90 there. So there's no normalization, as I already mentioned, and the slots may have different difficulty levels, right? So if you look at the last to last year, and even last year for that matter, the score, you will find a lot of people within say one or two scores, right? So for example, if you look at a score of 43, roughly translates to 97 percentile. But if you look at a score of 42, that is 96 percentile. So there are a lot of people who are within 42 to 43. So you're going to have people at say 42.25, 42.50, 42.75, and so on. So you will have a lot of people within that range. It's very, very tight. So difference of 1 mark creates a very significant difference on the percentile. So you will see at the higher end, it doesn't make a lot of difference. So let's say you're somebody who is at a 47, you're at 99.5. A 48 would take you to say a 99.8. 49 maybe a 99.9. 50 would possibly definitely take you to a 99.95 or something like that. But on the lower side, what happens is even a 1 mark difference can create a huge difference in your percentile. And that is why you have to be very clear while you're attempting that how certain am I of this, right? So unnecessary risks might hamper you. Okay. If it is necessary, you take it. But if it is unnecessary, you don't take it. Okay. So for example, let's say you're somebody who has, and even in the live solve that I had done, I had mentioned this, that let's say you're somebody who has attempted 50 genuine questions, right? 50 genuine attempts. And you know that you have, say, a nice 90-95% accuracy. Let's say you're getting 46, 47 correct out of 50. Now, 47 correct will take you to, say, a 99.5. Now, if you want, you can still take more risks because the downside isn't too much. But let's say you are at only 40 genuine attempts. Okay. Then the downside is higher. So that is why you should not take too many risks at that point of time. So it will depend from person to person as to how much risk can you actually take while you're taking the test. Whenever you take mocks, try to experiment a little bit, try to go a little faster, try to take a couple of shots and see whether it's working for you. If it doesn't, I would say just stick to your genuine attempts, all right? Because the negative is 1/4. So you have to do your math as well and see whether it will make sense to take some extra shots. And I've done it in the past, so it's not that I've not done it. But then generally, because I would have more attempts, or somebody who is getting, let's say, 99.9 would have more attempts, they are able to take those risks. But at lower percentages, because so many people will be sort of falling in one particular score difference, I don't think you should be taking a lot of risk. For example, last year, when you look at last to last year, 41 marks was 95 percentile, 40 marks was 93 percentile. Right? So it makes a lot of difference because of that 1 mark or 0.25 or even 0.5 marks is going to make a lot of difference to your percentile. Right? So keep that thing in mind while you're taking your test and strategizing the whole thing. So now let's talk about the individual sections a little bit. So what are the areas to focus on with respect to SNAP? Now, when it comes to English, majority of it is going to be grammar and vocab. Okay, so do a lot of practice of this. SNAP in the past has also asked questions on grammar in terms of the technical aspects of grammar. So for example, things like simile, metaphor, in terms of the exact what are the figures of speech and all of that. So it will make sense to have a little bit of practice on that front. And you will see similar questions on the IMS mock as well, where you have questions related to which of the following is used as a simile or hyperbole and so on. So those things are important. Make sure that you practice that. Conversion from active passive voice, parts of speech, fill in the blanks which are tense based or spelling based. Last year, for example, there were questions on identifying the correct spelling, where in a particular, the words were given which have double I. So things like nuclei or red eye and so on. So you have to identify which of them is the correct spelling and so on and so forth, right? A lot of questions on fill in the blanks, conjunctions, prepositions, phrases, idioms, etc. Synonym, antonym questions, so direct vocab and odd word out kind of questions. So spelling based questions also make appearance. So knowing the correct spelling of a particular word is always going to be helpful. Okay. Can we practice English via some of the mocks of IMS? Absolutely. So when you take IMS mocks, you're going to get that practice. And we are giving 10 mocks. 10 mocks is a very good number. If you take all 10, I think you'll be in a very good position to face the snap. Okay. As I said, RC didn't make an appearance last year and the year prior to that, but you never know. You can always get RC in your slot. So can't really say. Now, with respect, and even if it appears, I don't think they will ask more than 4 or 5 questions. So don't worry too much. Somebody has said, Varun is saying official mock had RC, but I've already mentioned that official mock is not a representation of what happens on the snap. I actually made it a point to take the official mock last year because we wanted to see what kind of questions they're asking. And a couple of us took it from the ACAT team, and all of us were like, what is wrong with them, right? So there are so many questions with errors, and the official mock is not worth your time, I would say. It's fine to take it, but don't take it very seriously. Or at least don't take your score very seriously. With respect to logical reasoning, they ask across the spectrum. So LR is one area where they go and to whatever length that possibly they can, and ask you questions from all sorts of things. So syllogisms, course of action, assumption, conclusion. So all your critical reasoning or verbal reasoning, which is there. Analogy, series. So all the non-verbal reasoning is essentially analogy, series, logical puzzles, clocks, calendars, family tree-based questions, input output. Last year, I remember, I think there was only one question on input output, circular arrangement questions or Venn diagram questions, coding, decoding, all of that can make an appearance. Okay, so you can have maybe even one question from each of these areas. You might have 2 questions from some area might not appear, etc. But broadly, if you do all of these topics, you should be good to go. Okay. Caselets appear, yes, so you can have maybe 1 or 2 caselets. Generally, it will be one caselet, arrangement question, typically either a circular or a linear arrangement or a matrix arrangement kind of a question. But again, there's no guarantee. See, the thing is, even if I say right now that, okay, you might get, let's say, 2 questions on clocks, you might not have even a single question on clock. Maybe in your slot it appears, in somebody else's slot it does not appear. So it's not a standardized test. Okay, so that is why the differences are always going to happen. That's why I said this is like a broad list of topics. You do all of it and hoping that you will get questions from these areas. But if you do this, I don't think anything outside this making an appearance. The only thing where it is slightly unpredictable is sometimes in logical puzzles in the past, especially, they have asked very arbitrary physics-based questions. And those questions are maybe 1 or 2. So you should not even worry too much about it. Right? So some random thing on if you have 2 candles and they're in different conditions. So there's one in like a, say, open surrounding. There is one in a closed room. There is one in some beaker under the water or something like that. Which candle will go out first? Right? So some sort of very random questions, and you cannot even prepare for them. These are typically the WhatsApp forwards that you get, that only 1% of genius can answer these questions. So some arbitrary logic thing, but last year, fortunately, there was nothing like that. And as I've said, even if it appears, it's just one question. So I don't think you should be worrying too much about it. With respect to quant, arithmetic is the most dominant area, and that is generally true for a lot of exams. So modern math, geometry, numbers, algebra. So technically, I've written all 5 areas of quant. There isn't something that you can say, okay, fine, I'll just skip this altogether. But you restrict yourself to, you don't do a lot of difficult questions. So that's the only thing that I will say. So your CAT preparation, if you've done, your snap quant is more or less done. I don't think you need to do anything else. Those of you who are doing, let's say, only NMAT, SNAP, CET, CMAT kind of preparation, right? And maybe you've not done a couple of topics in arithmetic, then I will suggest that, okay, fine, you go and do a little bit extra practice, slightly more difficult questions and all of that. technically you should not be skipping any area. So I saw some question on, can I skip a particular area? The answer is ideally no, because generally what happens in Snap is you only 20 questions, right? And some of them are going to be direct questions, very, very direct questions. So you see the question, you know the formula, you'll be able to solve it. For example, something like, say you want to paint a cuboid, which is hollow from outside and inside, right? And some cost is there and you have to find what the cost will be. So there is a direct formula for this. If you have not done your geometry and mensuration, then you're going to have a problem. So that is why don't leave a topic altogether. I would say at least do the basic concepts of all the topics, so that if there is a direct formula based questions, you're able to solve it. I'll talk about the individual sections a little bit more. So with respect to general English, I've already spoken about it. But last year, this was the breakup in my slot. Somebody else would have had a different breakup. So please don't take it to be the absolute truth that, okay, vocab, I'm going to have exactly 6 questions. That may not happen. So in my slot, there were 6 questions on vocab, 8 on grammar, 1 on some poetry based, some lines from I think poem written by Sarojini Naidu was given. And you had to identify which of those sentences does not adhere to the standard practice of writing in English. So when you write a sentence in English, the construction of it has a structure. So which of the following lines from some poem does not adhere to that structure? So when you see generally poetry, the writers or the poets tend to take a lot of liberty in writing the way they want to without really adhering to the standard rules of English. So which of the sentences did not fall into that? But yeah, that was like an arbitrary question, I would say. But apart from that, I think vocab and grammar was like the standard affair. If you have done your CAT and MAT preparation, I think you should be good to go for these areas. With respect to analytical and logical, this was like the rough breakup. So 1 question on calendar, 1 question on clock, 4 questions on clocks and calendars rather. I think I sort of made a mistake in writing calendar 1 there. But total of 4 questions on clocks and calendars made an appearance last year in my slot. For somebody else, the distribution would have been different. Right? Series, there were 2 questions, linear arrangement 2, coding 2, family tree 2, odd man out 1, sequential output 1, and numerical puzzle 1. Then the remaining was verbal reasoning. So that is syllogisms, statements and course of action, conclusion, assumptions, cause and effect. So if you have done your critical reasoning for NMAT, right, I think you should be good to go for SNAP. But if you're not done your critical reasoning preparation, it's a good time to spend some time on CR prep, because that is going to be, say, somewhere around, I would say, about 8 to 10 questions that can appear from this area. So that is why try to do this properly. Okay. Previous slide, sure. So this was the, again, I will keep saying this repeatedly, that it does not mean that this is the same distribution that you will have on the test. Okay. Please factor that in. You're going to have different number of questions. For example, poem-based question which appeared last year might not even come this time. You might have RC of 4 questions. So keep that in mind. With respect to analytical and logical reasoning, already spoken about it. And see, to be honest, I would say these are the questions where you have to take very, very quick calls, because sometimes, especially logical puzzles, for example, might look very interesting. And you start solving it and you don't even realize when you're spent, let's say, 1.5 or 2 minutes on a question. So that is why series or questions which have some trick logic associated with that, you have to be very cautious of how much time you're spending on it. Because if you lose the track of time, it becomes very difficult. A speed-based test like SNAP has very little comeback opportunities. As we've already seen with respect to scores which are very tightly distributed, every single mark is going to make a lot of difference. And that is why don't sit on questions for a very long time if you don't know what the exact logic is. So the skipping has to be very, very quick. And you see a question, if you're able to figure out, okay, what is going on, you do it. Otherwise, you don't do it, right? And because we know that clocks and calendars questions appear, I would say that all of you practice it. See, I've seen this a lot, that people don't practice the questions and then they're like, oh, fine, questions appeared from this area, I didn't know what to do. But have you practiced enough questions to get there? So with respect to clocks and calendars, there is a finite number of concepts that you have there. See, when a paper setter, and I've also created tests in the past, and that is why I know this, that when you're setting a test, right, sometimes you want to challenge the paper taker. So you want to make sure that you put some difficult questions. But there are very few areas where you can make very, very difficult questions. A lot of areas you will not be able to create very, very difficult tests. For example, a calendar question, right? What is the max difficulty that I can create, right? I might ask you to go say 100, 200 years back, but I will definitely not ask something which is beyond that. But with respect to series, I can create some very, very arbitrary logic series, right? So I can have something related to cubes plus squares of natural numbers and give that to you as a series. Now everybody's scratching their head at what exactly is going on. But what I've actually done is I've basically taken n cube plus n square and I've presented that to you as a series rather than giving a direct n cube series or an n square series, right? So there are areas where they can really experiment and create difficult questions, and it's better to stay away from those. But for areas where you can get direct questions, it's important that you cover the concepts thoroughly. So clocks, calendars, very finite set of concepts. Do it nicely and go for the test. Now, with respect to quant, which was difficult last year, and why we say difficult, it was slightly difficult compared to the previous year. So sectional difficulty overall was medium. There were a couple of questions which ideally students should have stayed away from. 14, 15 questions would have been a very good attempt last year, and I would say with 90% accuracy. So most of the questions appeared from arithmetic. There were 7 questions from that area. Modern math, which is P&C, probability, all of that combined, you had 4 questions. One of them was very difficult. Geometry questions, there were 4 of them. Numbers 2, algebra 2, data interpretation 1. So it's not that they're leaving one area altogether. It might happen in some cases where you don't have a single question from a particular area, but that doesn't mean that you don't do some particular area. So a lot of people will keep asking that if I skip geometry, is that fine? The answer is no, you cannot skip geometry. Because what if, let's say, tomorrow in your slot, you have 5 questions of geometry? Then you're not even competing for 20 questions. You're competing for only 15 questions. So what is the difficulty of modern math questions? See, there were some questions which were direct, some questions which required some case writing. So typically any modern math question which requires you to write cases falls in the difficult bracket. So say formation of committees with limited conditions is medium, but if you have to write a lot of cases, then it becomes difficult. So it's again, as I said, difficulty is a very subjective. So something that I might find easy. For example, how many zeros are end with? Now, for somebody who has done that concept, it's a straightforward question. But for somebody who has not done it, it's a difficult question. So that's the problem with assessment of difficulty. In any case, I would say if you have done your CAT prep well, I think Snap Quant should not bother you even a bit. If you have done your NMAT prep, the additional topics that you will have to do will of course be things like time, speed, distance, and geometry and mensuration, because that doesn't appear on the NMAT but appears on the Snap. So that's the only thing that you will have to do extra. But otherwise, arithmetic is constant across both CAT, Snap, and CMAT. So your CAT prep is going to help you for your Snap Quant as well. So and I think this is my last slide. So what's the overall prep strategy? See, firstly, you will have to have a look at a couple of past Snap papers. And I know a lot of people argue on this, that these are old papers, why should I do these and all of that. The point is, these questions the papers themselves are very good source of questions. Some of them are very challenging questions. So it's still worth your effort to do them. And how much time it will take to do, let's say, 5 papers of Snap, right? 5 days, right? If you do maybe 2 papers on a day, just 2.5 days. So when you look at 2008, 9, 10, 11, those papers are available. I've given the path on screen. So you have to go to IMS, go to resources, past papers, and you can find Snap 2008, 9, 10, 11, and 2018 papers. Now, why only these papers is because they're available in public domain. Earlier, Snap never used to give their paper out. So those papers are not available. 2008 onwards, they started giving out the paper. So you have 2008, 9, 10, 11, where the papers are actually available. Then in 2018, they made the paper available. So that is also there, right? So wherever it was given, we have put it on in this particular section. Go through it, It has a GK section, ignore that. It has a different format, ignore that. Purely use it to solve additional questions. So I'm not suggesting you these papers from a strategy perspective. I'm suggesting you these papers from a preparation perspective. Okay. As I've already said, do not spend too much time on any of the questions. If you see something which is ultra difficult, keep it for the end. Right? You can always come back to it. Because I've observed that most of the people are able to do the verbal section in about 10 minutes, right? Because it just has 15 questions. How much time will you need to read and answer questions very, very quickly? So 10 minutes is generally sufficient for most of the people for verbal. If you're very good, you might even finish it off in 5, 6, 7 minutes. The real problem is, of course, the quant and the logic section. And there also the problem is difficult questions. So don't sit on them unless you have taken care of all the easy questions in the test. Now, because you can jump between questions, make sure that you exhaust all the easy questions before you start breaking your head over what are the difficult ones on the test. Okay. Start with your strong section, but be flexible. This has happened in the past where I think it was 2019 snap, I recall, where I started with quant, and quant was insanely difficult for some reason. So if somebody, of course, I believe nobody has seen it, and it's not even available now, so no point. But 2019 snap was one of the most difficult quants on snap that I've seen. And I started with quant, and within a couple of questions, I realized that if I keep spending time on it, it's not going to work out for me. And I decided to switch to other sections. BRC was unbelievably straightforward. So I ensured that I get like a very high score there, did the LRDI post that, and then came to QA. LR after that, and then came to QADI. So that's how you have to do sometimes, because your strength, if it turns out to be difficult on that day, you have to be flexible. Okay. Now focus on areas that are most relevant for Snap. You've already spoken about what those topics are. I will take you back to that screen a little later. And the last thing is, of course, IMS mocks. So 10 mocks if you take, I think strategy wise, you will have enough practice. You will know how to exactly handle a speed exam. So what decisions do you make? How often do you look at the timer? How do you balance between your sections and all of that? Because it's just about strategy. See, the prep part of Snap isn't very, very different from other exams. So they are not going to ask you something which is out of the world. For example, say a ZAT decision making, you still have to prepare for it because it's a separate section. IFT GK, you have to prepare for it because it's a separate thing. Unlike, say, something like a CAT and MAT, where you have only quant, LRDI, VRs. So if you're prepared for CAT or you're prepared for NMAT, Snap preparation is more or less done. Now it's a matter of adapting to the form.